So today, we're going to be talking about the Qin Dynasty in China, arguably one of the most important dynasties in the dynastic era. So some background information. This was what China used to be like. It was split up in many countries, and you'll see Qin on the very left side. So China was separated into many countries, and the ruler of Qin was called Yin Zheng. He later renamed to Qin Shi Huangdi when he managed to conquer all of China, and he subsequently became the first emperor of Qin, and that's why he's called Shi Huangdi, because Shi means original or first. And that's a pretty picture of him. So this was the Chinese history timeline. You'll see that Qin dynasty is around the third or the fourth dynasties on the dynastic era. And it lasted from 221 BCE to 207 BCE, so it's not really a long time. It lasted only for 15 years, but do know that Shi Huangdi did rule for 37 years because he was the ruler when China was still in the Warring States era. So, Qin Shi Huang was now the emperor, so he naturally brought some reforms and changes. The first thing he did was unify China. There was only going to be one China. The China that we know of today is the China that he unified. He also standardized the written language. Note it's the written language, not the language, because people still spoke in different dialects and it was impossible to have a common dialect. So today in China and in many other places, we have dialects like Mandarin, Hokkien, Shanghainese. And so it's important to note that he only standardized the written language. He also standardized the currency, so now it was a circular coin with a square hole. Before, in many countries, all of their coins were different, so something like that. He also standardized the measurements, axle lengths, and weights to make things more efficient. And with that in mind, he built more roads and irrigation canals. And one of the most important things he did was building the Great Wall of China to fend off the Mongolians. However, do note that the Great Wall that we see today is not entirely from the Great Wall that in the Qin Dynasty. Most of what we see in the Great Wall in today is from the Ming Dynasty. The Ming did a lot of restoration work. He also came up with the idea of the full-time soldiers. Before, soldiers were hired only for part-time, and this idea can be later seen in the French Revolution. He also set up kind of a new government system. Firstly, feudalism was abolished. Feudalism was on the idea that the serfs were on the bottom of society, the aristocrats were on the top of society. So what he did was that he controlled the land with a systematic bureaucracy. He divided the state into counties governed by appointed officials. Families were now also put into mutual responsibility groups. If any person of a group committed a crime, the whole group will be punished. So he did a lot of great stuff back there, but he naturally had quite a few controversial things going on, as you could probably tell. He treated the workers really harshly, whether it's the work on the roads or the work on the Great Wall of China. And on the Great Wall of China, thousands died from hunger and exhaustion. It is also known as China's longest cemetery. The laws were really harsh, including labor, mutilation, and death. And this is what we know called as legalism. And legalism is really important, which we'll get to later. He also ordered the burning of all works of philosophy that contradicted his policies, namely Confucianism. The writings and philosophers of the 100 schools were burned, mainly that was from Confucius, and the scholars were executed and even buried alive. And the taxes were high, so many of the farmers could not afford the taxes, so they were really frustrated. So legalism. The Qin Dynasty adopted legalism. And what is legalism? Well, legalism was the idea that human nature is selfish and evil, and the people do what's best for themselves. So if you take philosophy class, it's kind of like Thomas Hobbes. People exist to serve and strengthen the state. The state is more important than the individual, and the state has absolute control over the power. In some extent, it's like the federal government in America, if you take AP US history, where the federal government has more control than the state government. The nobles lost most of the power, and because the Qin redistributed the land to the peasants to further weaken their power. And therefore, they lost cultural traditions because of the end of feudalism. So Qin really wanted the most power by weakening the nobles. The punishments were also severe, and there were rewards for people who helped make the state benefit. For example, if I caught my father criticizing the Qin government and I reported him to the government, I will be rewarded and he will be punished really severely. And because of harsh laws, many officials, strategists, and diplomats feared to give honest advice because they scared they will have the same consequences as others. This is almost comparable to Mao's China, because in Mao's China, Mao was, you could say, like a dictator, and he did not like anything that contradicted him, and he punished the people, sending them to reform camps for brainwash. However, you could also argue that it was a very high efficiency state, because Qin Shi Huang was like, hell, I could do whatever I want, so yeah. So causes for the fall of the Qin. The death of Qin Shi Huang led to the peasant rebellion. And why they rebelled? Well, number one was the harsh rule. Number two, taxes were really high, they were really frustrated. Number third, when Qin Shi Huang died, there was a short period of time where very incompetent leaders were on the throne. And because of the incompetence, the peasants decided to rebel. And this eventually led to a new dynasty called the Han Dynasty. And now a potential essay question. In the Qin Dynasty, the negatives outweighed the positives, and therefore China today would have been better off without a Qin victory during the Warring States era. Support, refute, or modify this claim. And I'll leave that to you to think about it and have fun studying.